As we go about delivering our lean and agile projects, thinking about such advanced topics as cycle time optimization, it's easy to forget that most of the world and much of Brisbane still operates in the paradigm that projects generally have one date when the product is made available to its users. Fellow Agilists, my name is John Stathakis, and the purpose of my presentation today is to get back to basics, to describe how this came to be the dominant model and why it's so important to move beyond it. Can you think of the last garden project you undertook? And if gardening is not your thing, the last project that you executed. It could be as simple as a new flower bed or as complex as the delivery of the International Space Station. Some of you may remember, before structured project management, people used to do just what they thought was best and then suffer the consequences as they went. A gardening project may have gone something like this. Someone would have an idea that a garden would be good. After a few quick measurements, the family would head down to Bunnings and buy some raw materials, picking up a few ideas as to what might work better, and then figuring it all out when they got back home. Whilst this approach works for the smallest of projects, anything beyond the trivial becomes unworkable. The wood may be cut too short and not fit the frame. The irrigation system might not fit the tap, and the pipes might be different sizes to the hoses, and so on. It was only in the 1950s that work started to formalize a structured project management process to develop solutions. Today, we think of this process as having distinct stages. For example, imagine, plan, build, test, deploy, and then operate. And it's been applied across most industries in the world to deliver most products. And you can see the waterfall implementation on the screen, where you go from requirements, design, development, test, and deploy. When you think of your garden project, how did you go about it? Without realizing it, you may have followed the structured approach to your project. Let me explain. Your partner may have said, wouldn't it be nice to have a vegetable garden? We have space at the back. If you're an ordered thinker, you may have suggested that we need to work out in detail what the garden would look like and what materials need to be purchased to complete the garden, including all of the pipes for the irrigation system and the netting and frame for the canopy. You may have made detailed drawings on paper to show how each part would fit together. After one trip to Bunnings, you assemble the bits and put them into place. After planting some seeds, you may have proudly displayed your completed garden to your partner and enjoyed some good veggies together for months to come. Of course, this approach has a much better chance of success than the chaotic process that I described previously. So, how did it go? Can you remember? Research suggests that for the majority of projects run in this way, there are still significant challenges. I'm not saying it's a bad approach, just that the field has evolved and that there are now different approaches that are normally more suited. Have a look at this picture. Does it look familiar? The path to the end result is often far more convoluted than you could ever have imagined. So what could go wrong, you ask? One way to distinguish agile thinkers from traditional ones is to ask the question, what could have been done better? Traditional thinkers will most often say, we could have planned better. Can we blame lack of planning for all issues that come up? Can we say that we did not ask the right questions? You should have asked your neighbor because he feels out of the loop and is upset that there are now more birds in the area. You may have discovered halfway through that it's too much work after all and you really don't have the time to complete it. You may discover that it looks horrible in the backyard and blocks the path that the dog likes to run. You may have discovered that the possums are able to get through your netting and that you can't find a good way to keep them out. You may have also discovered that you've created a lifelong commitment to keeping it going and that it's much easier to support your local grocer who has better produce anyway. I've been a project manager on some large projects, and it may surprise you that these are the types of issues that most projects experience. The key is that it's good to discover issues early rather than at the end, when you've spent all of the time and money that you wanted to put into this thing. You don't know how something is going to turn out until it's actually used, and often in ways that you never anticipated. Did you know that the first product ever sold on eBay was a broken laser pointer? The CEO of eBay phoned up the customer to let them know that the product was broken. Turns out the customer was a collector of broken laser pointers. True story. We also end up building things that no one ends up using. For example, we could have spent a lot of time building little fences between the crop types, only to find that they're not helpful and just get in the way when the garden is up and running. You may say that if issues like this are normal, how can there be a better way? It is true that you can't magically remove these issues, but you can find out about them earlier, and you can get benefits before the end of the project. Look at this diagram. It shows two ways of painting a picture. Either you can do it in modules, or you can do a rough sketch and then refine as you go. The second approach has a number of advantages. If you run out of time or resources, you have a working picture that can be used. You may even discover that step 2 is good enough for the end goal, and there's no need to move to step 3. Your audience might get an early indication of what you have in mind and make more meaningful contributions rather than waiting until the end when you can't change anything. So how does this apply to our gardening project? Imagine this is the end goal you're aiming for. So instead of starting with this, perhaps begin with this. This will allow you to go through the whole process of producing vegetables at minimal cost in time, money, and space. And then once you've got used to that, you can move on to this. Note that this is 3 times the scale of the previous step, 3 times the real estate, 3 times the types of vegetables, and a much more robust architecture. And when you're comfortable with the process, then increase the scale for the next step. Perhaps even adding in netting to keep the possums away, or add in an irrigation system. But always keep it one step at a time. At each stage, you will learn something about gardening and what works and what does not, and whether the effort to continue is worth it. These principles apply equally to massive projects as little ones. One example of many is the 2008 Qantas JetSmart project. Qantas spent $40 million trying to build a solution that was going to provide a parts management system for the company's airline mechanics. Instead of delivering a small subset of the solution and testing it with end users, they specified and built what they thought the business would need. The result was that the system was so difficult to use that the mechanics refused to use it. Qantas had to spend an additional 3 years delivering a new replacement system. That's not to say that you don't need to envisage, plan, build, test, deploy, and then operate. It's just that each iteration is small enough to give you a good taste of what the bigger picture involves, allowing you to prepare in a way that carries far less risk. Of course, there are more effective ways than doing these steps in sequence, but that is a topic for a different talk. It's easier to look back on a project and think that it would have been more efficient if we just built the damn thing, rather than going through the tortuous path to get there. However, the future is more tricky than you think. Conditions change, and you don't know what you will need most until you are there. 3 months ago, I would have thought that cruise ships were a great business model. I don't think that anymore. Some of the world's biggest systems have been built with this in mind. Remember the first version of Google Search? Whilst all of their competitors like Yahoo and AltaVista and Lycos had lifestyle portals, with everything that they thought people would need, Google provided a box to type in, a search, and a button to push. I think we know who won in the end. Fellow Agilists, I imagine that the need to deliver in an iterative way as opposed to a big bang is bread and butter to your daily lives, but it pays to go back to basics and re-establish a firm baseline as to why concepts such as iterative delivery to production is so important, especially since so much of Brisbane's industry still delivers projects once at the end. By breaking down your needs into smaller portions that deliver real value at each step, you are more likely to deliver a solution with less waste and is a better fit for your organization, such as your family. How are you going to run your next project?